I never thought I'd see you again." The words hung in the air as David stared at the woman standing before him, the waitress he hadn't seen in years. She wasn't just anyone to him. She had been the one who'd cared for him when he was at his lowest, in a nursing home where he had lost all hope. Sophie, the waitress, was calm and composed, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't the same woman who had served him meals with a smile. She held a secret, one that she had kept for years, and now, it was time for it to come to light. As David looked into her eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything. The world seemed to slow down, the busy noise of the restaurant fading into the background. Sophie stepped forward, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of something heavy. "You don't remember much from back then, do you?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for any sign of recognition. David furrowed his brow, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean? I remember you. I remember how you helped me when I was sick." Sophie nodded, but there was more to the story, something that she had kept hidden for all these years. "It wasn't just about helping you, David. I did more than that. I did things that you don't know about, things that could change everything you thought you knew." Her words were like a spark, igniting a fire of curiosity within him. What had she done? What secret was she holding back all this time? Sophie took a deep breath before continuing, her voice lower now, more serious. "The truth is, I'm not just the waitress you remember. I'm the daughter of the family that owns the nursing home you stayed in. I've been a part of this world in ways you never realized. I've known you longer than you think." David's heart skipped a beat. The revelation hit him harder than he had expected. Sophie wasn't just a caregiver. She was someone with a deeper connection to the world he had been a part of, a connection that he hadn't known about. He took a step back, trying to process what she had just said. His mind raced, images from the past flooding his memory. He had always seen her as a kind, simple woman who had been there when he was vulnerable, but now, everything was changing. You're telling me you've been involved in all of this? That you were more than just a waitress?" he asked, his voice shaky with disbelief. Sophie looked down, her hands clasped together. "Yes, and now, I need to tell you why I did what I did. It's time for you to know the full story." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. The truth, once hidden, was now coming to light, and it was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. What had Sophie been through? What was her real role in his recovery? And why had she kept this secret for so long? The questions flooded his mind, but one thing was clear. Everything he thought he knew was about to change forever. David sat in stunned silence, processing what Sophie had just revealed. The restaurant around him seemed to fade into the background as he tried to reconcile the woman before him with the image he had carried in his mind all these years. Sophie had always been the waitress, the caring woman who helped him when he was sick and vulnerable. But now, she was someone entirely different, someone tied to the very institution he had spent so much time in, someone with a family legacy he had never known. "I don't understand," David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide this from me?" Sophie's gaze softened, but her eyes remained steady, as though she had prepared for this moment long before it happened. "I didn't want you to see me as just another part of the system," she said, her voice calm, but filled with years of pent-up emotion. "I wanted you to see me for who I am, not for my last name, not for the connection to the family that runs the place you stayed. You were a patient, and I was just there to care for you." David looked at her, still struggling to grasp the truth. Everything about his memories of that time in the nursing home now seemed like a lie. Sophie wasn't just another waitress with a kind smile. She was tied to a powerful family, and yet, she had chosen to work in that role, among the people she was meant to oversee. "But why help me?" David asked, his brow furrowed. "What was it about me that made you do this? You could have been anywhere else, doing anything else, but you were there." Sophie took a deep breath, her eyes briefly looking away as she gathered her thoughts. "I didn't just help you because it was my job," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I helped you because I saw someone who was lost, someone who needed a chance. I know what it's like to feel stuck, David. To be surrounded by expectations and responsibilities that are beyond your control. But I also know what it's like to find something worth fighting for. And when I saw you there, so vulnerable, so defeated, I couldn't just stand by and watch you lose yourself. I wanted to give you a fighting chance." David felt his heart race as he listened to her words. He had never expected this level of depth from Sophie. She wasn't just a caregiver. She was someone who understood the weight of life's burdens, someone who had been there, struggling with her own set of challenges. But that didn't explain everything. "So what happens now?" David asked, his voice full of uncertainty. Sophie met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Now we face the truth," she said simply. "I've kept this secret for so long, thinking it was better to protect you, but I can't keep hiding anymore. You need to know who I am and why I did what I did. Only then can we move forward, not just as the millionaire and the waitress, but as two people who understand each other on a deeper level. It's time to stop pretending that everything is simple." David nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. He realized that his life had been more complicated than he had ever known, and Sophie had been at the center of it all. The truth was messy, but it was the only way they could move forward. "I don't know what comes next," David said, his voice full of a newfound vulnerability. "But I want to find out. Together." Sophie smiled softly, a sense of relief washing over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't carrying the burden of secrets alone. The moment felt like the beginning of something new, something that could change both of their lives forever. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were ready to walk it side by side. David stood still for a moment, his mind spinning with the weight of what Sophie had just revealed. She was not just the waitress he had once known in the nursing home. She was tied to a family that owned the very place he had spent so many months in. He couldn't comprehend how he had missed this detail. All these years, he had seen Sophie only as the kind-hearted woman who had cared for him when he was at his weakest, but now everything had changed. His mind raced through memories of the past, the long conversations they'd had, the way she had always been there when he needed someone to talk to. Was it all a lie? Was she only helping him because it was part of some family agenda? Sophie seemed to notice his inner turmoil. She stood in front of him, waiting for his reaction, but she didn't push him to speak. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them, allowing him the time he needed to process. Finally, David spoke, his voice shaky, still trying to make sense of the situation. "Why didn't you tell me? Why keep this from me all these years?" Sophie let out a long breath, and her gaze softened as she stepped closer to him. "I wasn't hiding anything, David," she said gently. "I just didn't want you to see me as part of that world. You were a patient. I was there to help you, to care for you, and that's what I did. But the truth wasn't something I thought you needed to know. Not then. Not when you were struggling." David's eyes locked onto hers, searching for answers in her steady gaze. "But I've known you for so long, Sophie. And now, you're telling me that there's so much I didn't know?" Sophie nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, there's more to me than what you saw. And it wasn't about me pretending. It was about me trying to give you the chance to heal, without the weight of family connections on your shoulders. I needed you to focus on yourself, not on who I was or where I came from." David felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, but amidst the confusion, there was one thing that stood clear. Sophie had cared for him in a way that no one else had. She had given him her time, her attention, her presence when he needed it the most. It wasn't about her family's wealth or her connection to the nursing home. It was about her choosing to help him when he was vulnerable. "You really did care, didn't you?" David asked, his voice cracking slightly. Sophie smiled softly, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding, of quiet strength. "I cared because you mattered, David. Not because of your money, not because of your status, but because I saw someone who was struggling, someone who needed a hand. And I was there to offer it." David felt his heart soften, the walls he had built around his emotions slowly crumbling. He had spent so much time protecting himself, building his empire, surrounding himself with people who only saw him for what he had, not for who he was. But Sophie, she had seen him. She had seen past the wealth and the power. And for the first time in a long time, David realized that he wasn't just a CEO, a successful businessman. He was a person who needed to be seen for who he was, not for what he could offer. The revelation was humbling, and in that moment, David understood why Sophie had kept her secret. She had been protecting him, giving him the space to heal without the burden of expectations. And now, as they stood there, facing each other, David knew that things between them had changed forever. The lines between the wealthy businessman and the humble waitress had blurred. They were no longer just two people with different backgrounds. They were two people who had shared a connection, one that was built on care, trust, and a newfound understanding. David sat in his office, staring out at the city skyline. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Sophie's revelation had shaken him to his core. She had been more than just the waitress in the nursing home. She had been a part of something much bigger, something he hadn't realized. The weight of her words hung in the air, and now he was left to process everything. How could he have been so blind? How had he missed the truth about Sophie, about the connection she had to everything? He ran his hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up inside him. The truth had come at a cost, but it was a cost he needed to face. He had spent so long building his empire, ensuring that he was in control, that he had forgotten the importance of connection. Sophie had cared for him, not because of his wealth or his status, but because she saw him for who he truly was, a man who was vulnerable and lost. David had been so focused on his business, his success, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Sophie had seen that, and in a way, she had saved him. He thought back to the time they spent together in the nursing home, the way she had quietly comforted him, never asking for anything in return. She had been a steady presence, offering him support when he felt the weakest. The thought of her now, standing in front of him with a new layer of complexity, left him feeling both confused and enlightened. How had she managed to keep her secret for so long? And why had she chosen to reveal it now? Was it because she had seen through the walls he had built around himself? Was it because she thought he needed to know the truth, no matter how difficult it was to hear? Sophie had given him the space to heal, to grow, and in doing so, she had shown him a side of life he had long ignored. But now, he couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. He had been so wrapped up in his world of business that he hadn't taken the time to truly see the people around him. Sophie had been right there, quietly changing his life in ways he hadn't even noticed. The realization hit him hard. He had been living a life of convenience, not purpose. He had neglected the people who cared for him, the people who had supported him when he needed it most. But now, with Sophie's revelation, he had been given a second chance to make things right. David picked up his phone and dialed Sophie's number. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice calm and steady. "Hello, Sophie," David said, his voice soft but determined. "I don't know what to say. I'm sorry for not seeing you for who you really are. I've been so caught up in myself, in my work, that I've failed to truly understand the people who've been there for me." Sophie paused for a moment, her voice gentle. "David, you don't need to apologize. I never expected you to understand. I did what I did because I believed in you. I believed that you deserved more than what you thought you were." David felt a lump form in his throat. "I don't know how to thank you for everything, for showing me what really matters. I've been living in a bubble, but now I want to change. I want to be someone who isn't just about business, someone who values the people who truly matter." Sophie's voice was filled with warmth. "I believe in you, David. You've already taken the first step." David smiled softly, the weight in his chest lifting. He had a long way to go, but he knew now that he wasn't alone. Sophie had shown him the path forward, and for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to take it. He looked out at the city again, but this time, it didn't feel so distant. He was ready to embrace the life he had been given, and the people who had been there all along. The future was uncertain, but with Sophie by his side, David knew he could face it with hope and determination. David had spent the last few days reflecting on everything that had happened. Sophie's revelation had shaken him, but in the quiet moments that followed, he found clarity. He could no longer ignore the truth of what she had shared with him. He had spent years building his empire, focused on success and material wealth, but he had neglected the most important thing, the people who mattered. He had been living in a bubble, insulated from the real world, and now, for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face the truth. Sophie had been there for him when no one else was, quietly helping him through one of the most difficult times in his life. And he had never truly appreciated it. As he walked through the city streets, David couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. He had been so focused on his own ambitions, so caught up in his own world, that he hadn't even noticed the people around him. But now things had changed. He could no longer keep ignoring the fact that Sophie, in her quiet way, had done more for him than anyone else. She had given him her time, her care, and most importantly, her belief in him. And that was something David had taken for granted. As he reached his office building, David paused for a moment, looking up at the towering structure. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for, everything he had achieved. But now, it felt empty, almost hollow. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone ringing. It was Sophie. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "David," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I've been thinking about what you said. I know this is all new for you, and I know it's hard, but I want you to understand something." David listened intently, his heart pounding in his chest. "You've been living for everyone else, David," Sophie continued. "But now, it's time to live for yourself. It's time to figure out what truly matters and who you want to be. You don't have to be defined by your success or your wealth. You can be more than that. You can be someone who cares, someone who makes a real difference." David felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so long chasing success, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside him, but it never did. He had overlooked the simple truths that Sophie had just reminded him of. "I've been so lost in my work," David said, his voice shaky. "I didn't realize what I was missing." Sophie's tone softened. "It's never too late to change, David. You just have to take the first step. It's not going to be easy, but you're stronger than you think." David smiled softly, the weight in his chest lifting. Sophie had shown him something he hadn't seen before, the importance of living with purpose, of finding meaning beyond success. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that he was ready to find them. As he hung up the phone, he felt a renewed sense of determination. It was time to make changes, to start living a life that mattered, not just for him, but for the people he cared about. David walked into his office with a new sense of clarity, knowing that his journey was far from over. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer afraid. He was ready to face it, one step at a time. David's thoughts were a whirl of emotions as he walked through the crowded streets of the city. The weight of the conversation with Sophie still lingered in his mind, and for the first time in a long time, he realized how much he had been missing. As a successful CEO, he had always believed that the more he achieved, the more fulfilled he would be. Yet, the truth that Sophie had revealed to him struck him harder than any business deal or corporate success ever could. Sophie wasn't just the waitress who had cared for him during his darkest moments. She was someone with a life and story far beyond what he had ever realized. And now, her words echoed in his ears. "It's time to live for yourself, David." The clarity of that statement hit him like a thunderbolt. For so many years, he had lived for the approval of others, for his company, for the image he had carefully crafted. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what really mattered. As he sat at his desk later that day, David couldn't help but feel the difference. The office, once a symbol of power and success, now felt like a cage, a place where he had built his empire but lost touch with the things that truly made life worth living. His mind wandered back to the days in the nursing home, where Sophie had been his rock, and he had never truly understood her sacrifice. She had done so much for him, not because of her job, but because she cared. And now, David realized that he had spent so much time building his professional success that he had failed to connect with the people who truly mattered, people like Sophie. David's phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Sophie. He hesitated for a moment, still processing everything she had told him. But with a deep breath, he answered. "David." Sophie's voice was warm and steady. "I know this might be overwhelming, but I want you to know that you don't have to carry everything alone. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be vulnerable." David's chest tightened as he listened. Sophie had always been strong, a steady presence in his life when he had needed it most. But now, she was giving him something even more valuable, permission to be human. "I never realized how much I needed that reminder," David said softly. "I've spent so long trying to hold everything together, thinking that I had to be perfect, that I had to be the one who always had it all figured out. But now, I see that it's okay to let go." Sophie paused for a moment before speaking again. "You've already come so far, David. Just by acknowledging the truth, you've taken the first step toward change." David smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a person, capable of growth, of learning from his mistakes, and of making a real difference in the lives of those who mattered. "Thank you, Sophie," David said quietly, "for everything, for seeing me when no one else did." Sophie's voice softened. "You don't have to thank me, David. You've always had it in you. You just needed to see it. As the call ended, David felt a sense of peace settle over him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. On his own terms, with a newfound sense of purpose and a deeper appreciation for the people who had stood by him along the way. The road ahead wasn't clear, but David was no longer afraid to walk it. He had learned that it wasn't the success or the money that defined him. It was the connections, the relationships, and the strength to keep moving forward, no matter what. And with Sophie's support, he knew he was no longer alone. David sat at his desk, staring out of the window at the city skyline, deep in thought. The weight of the past few days settled heavily on him, but something was different now. He wasn't sure how to describe it, but there was a sense of clarity in his mind that had been absent before. Sophie's words still echoed in his mind. It's time to live for yourself. He had always thought that success was the ultimate goal, that achieving wealth and power would fill the emptiness he had felt for so long. But now, he saw it differently. Success without purpose was hollow. He had spent so much time building his empire, trying to prove something to the world, but he had neglected the things that really mattered, the relationships, the people who had been there for him when he needed them the most. He looked at the picture of his family on his desk, the one that had been taken years ago when things seemed easier. A wave of guilt washed over him. Sophie had shown him a side of life he had never fully understood. She had helped him without expecting anything in return, quietly guiding him back to health when he was at his lowest. And now, she had given him the truth he needed to hear. Sophie had been right. He had been living in a bubble, wrapped up in his own world, and it had cost him. His relationships had become transactional, defined by what people could offer him or what he could offer them. But Sophie had cared for him not because of his status, but because she saw him as a person in need, someone worth helping. David's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sophie. I hope you're doing okay. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. He stared at the message for a moment, feeling a sense of gratitude he hadn't felt before. It was strange how someone like Sophie, someone he had once seen as just a caregiver, had become such an important part of his life. He took a deep breath, then typed a response. Thank you for everything. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I'm ready to make some changes. He paused for a moment before hitting send, then sat back in his chair, reflecting on the future. He wasn't sure what it would look like, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He had spent so long pursuing success, but now he realized that true success wasn't just about what you achieved. It was about who you became along the way. It was about living with purpose and living for something greater than yourself. As he looked back out the window, David felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The city stretched out before him, full of possibilities. And for the first time, he didn't feel the need to conquer it all. He just needed to find his way forward, step by step. His phone buzzed again. It was Sophie. Remember, you don't have to do it alone. David smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. Sophie had given him more than just advice. She had given him the strength to face the truth and the courage to embrace change. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Sophie's support, he knew he could face whatever came next. It was time to take control of his life, to stop chasing success for the wrong reasons, and to start living with purpose. David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the past lift off his shoulders. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer afraid to walk it. David stood in front of his office window, watching the sun set over the city. The light reflected off the glass buildings, casting a warm glow over the streets below. He had spent the last few weeks trying to process everything that had happened. Sophie's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was finally beginning to understand. He had spent so much of his life focusing on building his empire, on climbing the corporate ladder, that he had forgotten what really mattered. Now, after everything that had happened, he realized that the relationships he had neglected were the most important thing of all. Sophie had opened his eyes to a side of life he had never truly understood. The importance of caring for others, of being there for the people who mattered, not just for the things that could be bought. He had lived his life as if success and wealth were the ultimate goals, but now he saw that it wasn't about what he had achieved. It was about the connections he had made, the people he had impacted, and the way he had allowed himself to be changed by them. Sophie had been there for him when he was at his lowest, when he had nothing left but a feeling of emptiness. She had shown him what it meant to truly care for someone, and for that, he was forever grateful. He looked down at his phone, thinking about the messages Sophie had sent him. It had been a few weeks since they last spoke, and in that time, he had made some significant changes. He wasn't sure if it was too soon to reach out, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they needed to continue the conversation. He picked up the phone and dialed her number. It rang a few times before she answered. David. Sophie's voice was calm, but there was a warmth to it that he hadn't heard in a long time. Hey, Sophie, David said, his voice filled with a mix of emotions. I've been thinking about what you said, about everything, and I wanted to say thank you. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You don't have to thank me, David, Sophie replied softly. I did what I did because I believed in you. I believed that you could make a change, that you could find your way. David swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. I don't know if I would have ever found that way if it weren't for you. You showed me what I've been missing all these years. Sophie sighed gently. You've always had it in you, David. You just needed to see it. Sometimes, the hardest part is realizing that it's okay to be vulnerable, to let go of the need to always be in control. David nodded, even though she couldn't see him. I'm ready to make some changes, Sophie. I don't know what it will look like yet, but I know it's time to start living differently. I want to be someone who values the people in my life, who isn't just focused on work and success. Sophie's voice softened with a smile that David could almost hear. I'm proud of you, David. You're on the right path. Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being real and being there for the people who matter. David felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he listened to Sophie's words. For so long, he had been carrying the burden of expectations, his own and others. But now, he was beginning to understand that it was okay to let go of that weight. He didn't have to be the perfect CEO, the perfect businessman. He just had to be himself. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to embrace that. He had learned a lot from Sophie, and now he was ready to show up for the people who mattered, just as she had done for him. I'm going to do this, Sophie, David said, his voice filled with resolve. I'm going to make the changes I need to make, and I'm going to be better, for myself and for the people I care about. Sophie's voice was full of warmth and encouragement. I know you will, David. I believe in you. As the conversation ended, David felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew he was no longer walking it alone. The future was full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to embrace it with open arms. David looked out over the city once more, his mind racing as he tried to fully comprehend how far he had come. The man who had once been consumed by his work, by his need to climb higher and achieve more, was now someone else. Sophie had changed him in ways he didn't fully understand yet. It wasn't just about her caring for him when he was vulnerable. It was about the lessons she had quietly taught him without ever demanding anything in return. Sophie had never asked for anything but his well-being, and in doing so, she had given him the most precious thing, the ability to look at life differently. His phone buzzed, bringing him back to the present moment. It was a message from Sophie. Asterisk. How are you doing, David? Have you figured out what you want to do? Asterisk. David smiled as he read the message, grateful for her continued support. He had told her that he was ready to change, ready to live with purpose, but now he was beginning to understand just how big that change needed to be. It wasn't just about shifting his focus from work to personal life. It was about letting go of the image he had built for himself, an image that had kept him locked in a cycle of endless striving. He realized that he had been living with a sense of achievement that had never been truly satisfying. He had been living for approval, for the recognition of his success, not for the fulfillment of his own heart. With Sophie's guidance, he was starting to see that true success wasn't in the accolades or the status. It was in the connections he made, in the way he showed up for the people who mattered. David typed a quick reply to Sophie. Asterisk. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant. It's time to stop pretending that success is all that matters. I've spent so many years thinking that the more I achieved, the more fulfilled I would be, but I've learned that it's not true. I'm ready to focus on what really matters. Asterisk. Sophie's reply came swiftly. Asterisk. I'm so proud of you, David. You've always had it in you. I just knew you needed to see it. You're on the right path. Asterisk. David felt a surge of gratitude as he read her words. He wasn't sure what the future held, But he knew that with Sophie's support, he was no longer alone on this journey. He picked up his jacket and left his office, stepping out into the cool evening air. For the first time in a long while, the city didn't feel so overwhelming. He felt lighter, more grounded, as if he had been freed from the chains of his own expectations. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to walk it, one step at a time. He wasn't going to let fear or doubt hold him back anymore. Sophie had shown him that it was okay to be vulnerable, to let go of the need for control, and to embrace the beauty of human connection. As he walked through the streets, David couldn't help but smile. The world felt different now, not in a way that was grandiose, but in a way that was deep and meaningful. He was no longer just living for the next big deal or the next promotion. He was living for something more. He was living for himself and for the people who truly mattered. And that, he realized, was the greatest success he could ever achieve.